Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I am Morgan Lopez for RAM Media, and today we are discussing the third trait in my 5-part series, which is extraversion. Fascinating. I said that about all of them, don't I? So forget that, let's just get stuck into it, shall we? Jolly good. Off we go. You know, when in Rome, speak as the Romans do. I live in the UK. Jolly good. Let's proceed then, shall we? That should give you a little bit of an indicator on where I sit on the extraversion category. Very high. So that was actually an interesting way to introduce a personality trait. Maybe I should try that with my other videos, who knows. So, extraversion. If you're looking, you all know them. You would have known them at school, so on and so forth. The class clown, guys always joking around, and the assertive, the popular, the social, etc. Right? Usually quite jolly, easy going, happy-go-lucky type of people, center of attention, not shy at all, you know, participate, so on and so forth, you know, the life of the party, as it were. These are the kind of people you want around if you want a good time, really party, so on and so forth. These are the sort of people you want to have around. Very talkative people, enthusiastic, assertive, which is why males who are very social are usually tend to be dominant males, right? Because it breaks down, extraversion breaks down into two components, which are, if I have a look over here, just to be 100% certain, you've got enthusiasm. It breaks down into enthusiasm and assertiveness, right? And so males are typically more assertive. So let's have a squiz. Whoops, I lost my little thing over there. Here we go. I've recovered it. So if you're looking in the population, in terms of extraversion, you will find the following. I completely lost my place with this stupid thing. Here we go. Haha. Assertiveness. So men are generally more assertive than women, right? In terms of the distribution. So for example, if you take a random population, on average, women will score 48% on the 48th percentile for assertiveness, whilst men on average will score about 52. All right, so men are a couple of points higher typically, and this actually does cause a lot of problems between the two genders, because women will tend to feel bullied, for example, by men, right? And that's why. And for those of you who are curious, I rank in the 98th percentile for assertiveness, so that's exceptionally high. So there are very, very, very few people. Let's put it this way: there are only about 2 people in every 100 people that would be more assertive than me, in terms of being able to intimidate me and things of that sort, or shout me down and all that sort of thing. So assertiveness has its uses, but then on the other hand, one of the negative sides, you know, if you're too assertive, you can railroad people, you can be a bully yourself, and these are certainly things that I have been in the past, and something that I've had to pay specific attention to. And then the other one, so you've got assertiveness, and the other one you've got enthusiasm. Now here's the interesting thing: women are typically higher in enthusiasm, right? So on average, in the population, women will score about 55 on average for for enthusiasm, whereas men will generally only score 45. So there's that interesting difference over there. So in terms of enthusiasm, I'm actually, how can I say, more on the feminine side. So I score in the 86th percentile for enthusiasm, which is also very, very high. And it's a typically female dominate that high end of this particular spectrum. And that's one of the reasons why I tend to find myself actually getting along with women easier than I do with men. Typically because, and here's the interesting thing. So in the population, if you take extraversion, so the main category, women are higher in extraversion than men on average. So women on average in the population will score about 52, whereas men will only score 48. Right? Even though men score higher in assertiveness and women in enthusiasm. So generally I find I get along better with women than with men, because with men it usually devolves into what's how can you say, I struggle getting along with men because there's usually a pissing contest involved, and I apologize for the term, but I really can't think of another one. But with men it becomes a pissing contest, and then one struggles to just like, let's just chill out, dude. I'm not competing with you or anything like that. As women are less concerned with this, and because they're more enthusiastic, they just like to participate in a conversation and be talkative and all of that sort of thing. And it's what leads to the how can I say, the disparagement that men generally have with women, where men complain that women talk too much and are very, very talkative. That is actually true, but whether they talk too much is actually a matter of perspective. And the reason why men say that is because they're lower in enthusiasm, generally lower in extraversion in general, which means they will be less talkative, etc., outgoing, and all of these sorts of things than women are. It's also generally why you will find women enjoy clubbing and things of that sort more often than men. It's usually if men are going there in order to find women, right, or they're being dragged there by their woman, right? So that's a very interesting sort of thing. It's part of the how can you say? And this sort of ties in a little bit with your sort of agreeableness, so to speak. You're more enthusiastic means you are if you're higher in agreeableness, you'll tend to be more cooperative and enthusiastic to cooperate and do what other people ask of you and all of that sort of thing. And so, it makes a lot of sense that people break down in this way. So me, I'm actually very atypical for a man. Typical in terms of assertiveness, so very, very high assertiveness. So in the 98th percentile of assertiveness, almost exclusively men at this level. Because as you have a bell curve, right? So in the middle, that's where most men and women average. But as you get further to the extremes, you get more and more of one gender and less of the other, right? So for assertiveness, you've got the bell curve. At the peak of the bell curve is where most men and women are, generally speaking. But in terms of assertiveness, as you go to the lower end, so towards zero, so not assertive at all, a pushover, basically, people who you can just railroad very easily, you get more and more women towards that and fewer men. And then on the other side, as you get to higher assertiveness, so to the point of being a bully and just railroading people, and you don't really mind conflict, you just have at it and you push your way through. As you get to that higher end, you start getting fewer women and more men, to the point where I think from about the 98th, or let's say for argument's sake 95th percentile onwards, is almost no woman at all, and the same thing on the other side. So this is how we are distributed. So now enthusiasm, as we were saying just before that little segue, is positive, optimistic, and they warm up quickly to other people, so they make friends very, very easily. So here's the interesting thing: extraversion. You would think that people who are high in extraversion are always about other people, and that's not actually necessarily the case. So for men, they're less interested in the people than they are about just the socializing in general than the people, and that's in your assertiveness thing. It's I'm being dominant, and this is my place of dominance where I can be, and it, how can I say, sort of express myself and put myself out into the world. Whereas then with women typically who are higher enthusiasm, it's that excitement for that the relationship potential of your social situations, and which again correlates then with women being higher in agreeableness in general. They're more interested in people and relationships and things of that sort. So warm up quickly to others. So for example, I'm atypical in enthusiasm for men. So I make friends easily. I warm up to people easily, and all of that sort of thing. It's been very, very. I've always wondered why I got along better with women. In general, men tend to find me, too much and too talkative, and it's like, okay, dude, now shut up now. I always thought it was because I'm a Latino. But it turns out that's not the case. It's actually, I was mistaken. This actually it's a trait. So yes, here's the interesting thing though. Right. So just to be sure, high extroversion, it doesn't necessarily mean that the people who are high in extroversion like the people that they're around. They like the social context. They don't necessarily like the people. Right, which is why you find a lot of extroverts. So, for example, think about your Hollywood stars, right? Your singers, your actors, and all of that sort of thing. Those people will be very, very high in extroversion. Those who go and act and put themselves out there, right? But how many of them treat their fans and and people in general? How many of them treat people with contempt? They actually don't care, about their people. And when you read about what they're like in their private lives, they're absolutely abysmal people. They're really just they're aggressive, they're wretched, and they treat fans like absolute garbage. So just because a person is highly extrovert does not actually mean that they necessarily care about the people in the social situation. They only care about the social stimulation that it gives them, right? Unless they're agreeable and higher in the enthusiasm subtrait. Now here's the interesting thing is high extroversion, specifically assertiveness and low conscientiousness, if I'm not mistaken, are actually markers for a narcissist. Just keep that at the back of your mind there. It's actually very, very typical for someone who's narcissistic, and also especially if I'm not mistaken, especially if they've got high neuroticism as well. No? Low neuroticism. Low neuroticism. So yeah, that's quite an interesting little bit there. Now, so to talk about the other side, if you are an introvert, so as an extrovert, and this is actually a point where even though I'm ridiculously high in extroversion, in this point I actually relate more to an introvert than I do to an extrovert, which is actually quite interesting. I'm not entirely sure why this is the case. I've got my theories. But anyway, if you're an extrovert, you are energized by social situations, right? So if you're on your own, first of all, chances are you can't stand being on your own at all, right? And you'll want to go out. So if you're on your own, you'll actually feel a bit, a little bit low, a little bit maybe drained and sort of sluggish and whatever. And if someone says, hey, let's go out, then man, all of a sudden it's like you have a surge of energy. Hey, we're going to go out, and you go out and you come back home and you're buzzing at the end of the evening, and it was like, hey, that's great. I was energized by that. That's what I needed. Whereas for an introvert, they love being on their own. That's where they regenerate, as it were. Unlike the extrovert, they regenerate when they're on their own. And if you take an introvert and send them out, by the time they come back, they're exhausted. They're like, okay, I don't need to go to another club for 5 years, right? I've had enough. That was enough socializing for me. And that's interesting because even though I'm ridiculously high in extroversion, in that particular regard, I'm exhausted, completely exhausted by social situations. I'm not energized by social situations at all. And I think for my case in particular, it's because I'm low in agreeableness and high in openness, and and also I'm low in agreeableness, which means that I get irritated with people easily, and high in openness, which means I'm an intellectual, and most people are not as high in openness as I am. So I'm right up in the 90s, which means I'm easily bored by people. So for me to be social means that I am energized if it's an intellectually stimulating situation, but the vast majority of time, because I'm so low in agreeableness and so high in openness, I'm bored by people, and the little idiosyncrasies irritate the hell out of me. I find people to be trivial and stupid, and so I have to pretend to be interested in the mundane and the so social situations are not exclusively go to the club, go to the pub, go to the party where everyone's jumping up and down. It's just socializing in general. So my personality trait means that I'm energized by very, very specific types of social situations, and if you look at in the world in terms of the types of socializing there is, the vast majority of them lie completely outside my trait, and so they end up actually just irritating me and draining me. So that's why I believe that is the case for me. But I agree with the high extroversion in terms of myself, because I do crave that social intellectual stimulation that one gets from being people who are like-minded, and you can go and have a real good debate and that I am energized from. Or if I go to watch a debate or a lecture on something like that, and there's a nice rugged discussion about various things afterwards among the people who are like-minded, that for me is pretty cool. But it's exceptionally rare. The vast majority of socializing is done pubs, clubs, and stuff like that, where it's low conscientious people that you're not there to stimulate your brain. You're just there to hammer your brains out, basically, or kill brain cells, not stimulate them. So that tends to be the case. Now, so for introverts, you will find then shy people hate being center of attention. Not really your leadership types. Prefer to be on their own, and it doesn't mean they're depressed. Although, interestingly enough, openness is the positive emotion dimension, which appears that it lies on the opposite side of well, not exactly, but it lies on the opposite side of neuroticism. So neuroticism is sensitivity to negative emotion, although being low in extroversion doesn't mean necessarily that you're high in neuroticism, which is quite interesting at all. So it's a little bit strange how that actually works. But it is found that people who, because it's the high positive emotion dimension, you find that people who are very high in extroversion will also be less fearful, so they can encounter. Let's actually have we'll have a look here. Let me first go back to a previous point. So it seems like, let's talk about the neuroanatomy, because that's actually quite interesting, right? So we've got a few studies here which talk about where why more or less we are an extrovert is an extrovert, right? So it seems that it has to do, there's a correlation with a gray matter of a place in your brain called the amygdala. Now, the amygdala is a very, very small little place. So if you sort of look at your eyes, right, and sort of come to the back, sort of around here, on both sides, and go sort of to the center of the brain, right, and then sort of move out, it's like two little areas on each side with the amygdala, and it has to do with what they say. It's a integrative center for emotions. So that's where your sort of emotions are processed and integrated, and all of that sort of thing. So if something happens, you have an emotional response, and you're sort of trying to process it. It's your prefrontal cortex trying to process your emotion, and so the emotion is happening in that region, and that's what's going on. Now, the interesting thing is that, let's get this correct. Let me just see. Right. So, gray matter concentration. So there's individual differences in brain volume and gray matter concentration. So when they looked at the amygdala, they found that extraversion is positively correlated with gray matter concentration on the left amygdala, right? So the more dense it is in terms of brain matter, seems to be correlated with higher degrees of extraversion, which is very, very interesting. Whereas neuroticism is negatively correlated with gray matter concentration on the right amygdala. So you will be higher in neuroticism if you have lower concentrations of brain matter on the right side of your amygdala, which is very, very interesting. Now, if you think about how emotions and things like that, like, for example, and this is why extroverted people deal better with emotions in general. It seems like extraversion is not only a buffer against negative emotions, but if negative emotions are experienced, extraversion allows you a much higher success rate, or how can I say, rate of resolution of taking those negative emotions, sort of articulating and explaining, or whatever the case might be, and integrating them with your understanding about things, so that you come to terms with and get over negative emotions a lot faster than someone who is neurotic and who would be low in extroversion. It's actually quite fascinating. So what happens is, and this is why, for example, the discipline of psychology or counseling, or even just coming home and talking to your wife or your family, your friends, where what they found is, if you can take whatever's going on in your life, positive, negative, whatever the case might be, and you can take all of it and make it real, so put it into words, right? Take these abstractions, these experiences, because your experiences are just experiences, and then you can make them real through words. It's very interesting. If you talk to people, if you're counseling people, and someone has and you're talking to the person and they're trying to articulate what they're saying, and suddenly they say something and they're like, wow, that makes it so real. Have you ever seen someone do that, where you say something and they're like, wow, admitting it suddenly makes it very real? Which is actually one of the reasons why a lot of people avoid talking about things, because saying it is so this is what's actually going on in the brain. It's fascinating. So when you articulate everything, what's going on is, you've got your brain, and you sort of got an outer and an inner. So on the inner, that's almost like where you've got the amygdala and hippocampus and all the little bits there, right? And then you've got the outer sort of section. So you've got your middle layer and sort of your spinal cord, right? And those little bits there, and then you've got your prefrontal cortex and all the other bits around it. So what happens is, those emotional, it's almost like the more generally speaking, are the sort of the more primitive parts of your brain, so to speak, was that's the raw emotion and the raw experience of things, so to speak, right? That's your animalistic part, right? So that's where you're feeling whatever it is that you're feeling in those centers. And when you articulate what's going on in there, right, you are actually then using your prefrontal cortex and everything and assimilating. And so it's almost like all the activity that's there as you articulate starts being integrated into the higher function parts of your brain, and then the activity in those emotion centers then begins to settle, right? Now, the reason why people feel greater anxiety and things of that sort when they don't talk about things, when they call bottling things up, is because if the experiences and the emotions stay in that region of your brain, that's almost like where the stress lies. It puts your body at a constant alert it's like your body's just constantly on red alert the whole time, right? It's like on all the time. And the only way to get it to switch off is to actually talk about things, because by talking about things, by articulating things, it then moves it into the higher parts of your brain where you understand it and then integrate it into your articulated map of experience, and it's where you reach that understanding, which means then that deactivates, and then it's mapped in your brain, and then you settle, right? And if you don't do that, and that's why talking therapy and just listening to each other, it's why women enjoy talking. So men, pay attention, right? When women come and they talk to you, this is actually what they're doing, because it's why women need to talk more than men do, because women are more emotional. That's just one of those things, right? Just accept it. They're more emotional. So when they talk, what they do not realize they're doing, and what us as men don't realize they're doing, is they're actually integrating their experiences and integrating into their map of the world and of being, and they're articulating things. And this is why, generally speaking, women are more emotional than men, right? But women on average deal better with negative emotions than men do. Much better, right? Much better. And the reason for that is because they are much more prone to articulate these things, and they practice, because they practice that process. They become much better at it, and so they integrate those emotions and are much more successful. And so this is the interesting thing. It's like, because women also in general experience more negative emotion than men do, just hands down, right? So neuroticism trait, women are higher than men in neuroticism trait. And so women are constantly doing this thing. So it's almost like they're more used to dealing with negative emotions and then talking about it and integrating it and moving it along. And so they are a lot more, so when they do experience like highly negative emotions and things like that, they are a lot more resilient and things of that sort, which is why men, typically what men do, they experience something profoundly, horrible, whatever the case might be. What do? They bottle it up. They become volatile and destructive and criminal, and they just become a wreck. They're just an absolute mess. And it can be a lot more difficult to deal with men in that regard, as many women will fully appreciate and understand exactly what that's like. So men, learn how to do this, man. You're doing yourself a disservice by not getting that practice. And so here's the interesting thing as well, when they talk about higher extraversion is high concentration in the left side of the amygdala. Neuroticism is higher with low concentration in the right. Now, here's the interesting thing. When, let's say you're learning how to do something new. And this is very, very interesting. You're learning how to do something new. New experiences are handled by the right side of your brain. Right? So you will handle new experiences a lot better if you've got a high mass, high concentration, good activity in your right hemisphere. Right? New experiences and all that sort of thing. Now, when the more accustomed you get to a particular thing, so when something becomes routine, then it moves from the right to the left, where the left is where things go when things are now understood and you've got it formulated down and so on and so forth. So we talk about left brain dominant, right brain dominant, right? The creatives and the orderly. Very, very interesting. So when you're learning something, you'll have a lot of activity, a lot of electrical activity going on. The electrical activity will move gradually from, basically speaking, from right to left and then to the back, which is your subconscious. That's where things start becoming automated, right? So you're developing your habit, and eventually when you become a master at something, they say, oh, I could do that with my eyes closed, right? It's because it's gone through that process. It's gone from new experience, learning, right brain, to integrated and understood left brain, and the more it's practiced, it goes back sort of to the more automatic parts, and then they find that the amount of electrical activity going on, the better you get at something, reduces, because what that means is it's almost like you're using less fuel, less brain fuel and brain resources to perform this task, because the better you get at it, the more efficient your brain becomes at running out the process, right? So it's like a more efficient car uses less fuel, is basically how it is. So your brain is becoming more efficient at this particular task. So the more efficient becomes and the more used to it you get. It's like what they call almost like muscle memory. Moves to the back. It's now automatic and uses very, very little resources. And that's then when you can start then multitasking, because you can automatically do one thing and then whilst focusing then the frontal resources, the cognitive resources then on something else. And that's basically how it works. I mean, I've made it a lot more simplified, but that's basically how it works. So it does seem like the high extraversion, the good emotions, right, is seated on with high brain mass and matter concentration on the amygdala on the left, and neuroticism with low concentration on the right. Very, very interesting. So low concentration of brain matter means, or sort of basically, you have less resources to cope with integrating a new experience, which is very interesting. So that might be, where sort of your neuroticism, your introversion and things of that it looks like it's all going on there with these densities and things. It's literally about, because you need both sides. So if you're more dense, you have wherever it is. So here's the interesting thing: when you say that someone is dense, it means they're stupid. That's in the common parlance. But you actually want a dense brain, right? Because a more dense brain is more neurons, there's more matter over there, more resources with which to perform activities of cognitive and emotional and behavioral calculation, so to speak. It's very, very interesting. Now here's the interesting thing, right? On this particular study that they did, I'm linking all the studies in the description below, so go have a look, man. These things are brilliant. So, and this is very interesting to understand, because again, a lot of these things they are studying extraversion and neuroticism sort of together, because they tend to sort of be opposite to each other. So I'll just read it here. Just extraversion was positively correlated with grey matter concentration in the left amygdala, whereas neuroticism was negatively correlated with grey matter concentration on the right amygdala. Right, we've been there. Given that neuroticism is a risk factor for depression, our finding offers one explanation as to why prior structural imaging studies of depressed patients, which did not control for personality, right? So it's a factor; it has to be taken into account. So if you're depressed, don't just think, oh, I've got brain damage. Hang on, it might be a personality trait there somewhere, right? You could be high in neuroticism and low in extroversion. Produce conflicting findings, right? It offers one explanation as to why prior structural imaging studies of depressed patients, which did not control for personality, produce conflicting findings. So they're managing to sort certain things out here, right? And they're explaining certain discrepancies in prior understanding and research. Furthermore, our data are consistent with the view that amygdala reduction seen in depressed patients precedes the onset of the disease rather than being a consequence of the illness. So people who are suffering from, let's say they suffer from depression or whatever the case might be, what they're saying here is amygdala reduction seen in depressed patients precedes the onset of depression. So you are inheriting depression rather than something wrong with you causing the depression, right? And the depression is something that's going wrong with you that's actually reducing it's reducing killing of brain matter. Now here's the interesting thing. Alcohol increases neuroticism. Alcohol kills brain cells. So there we go. There's a paper that I found that researches the effects that alcohol has on your big 5 personality traits. Fascinating. It basically settles the question. It proves leave that stuff alone, no matter how fantastic it is, right? Because alcohol for some people can hit the dopaminergic system and it's like, yeehaw, off we go. So it's that incentive reward. It whacks that and sends you off. So yeah, man, really, really, really interesting. So depression, whatever's causing your depression, can actually. So it might be that people, whatever they're doing to themselves, might actually be damaging their brain somehow, and then depression. So, and we know that these things happen. I mean, depression can be associated with like inflammatory autoimmune diseases and things of that sort. Lifestyle choices, that will affect your brain. We know that sportsmen who are involved in very rough sports like rugby and football and things like that, where you get hit in the head, even football players, because soccer, for those of you in other countries, right, if you do a header, that impact of the ball actually is it's a significant shock. We weren't designed to do that, right? It's header balls around. It's just, not what was intended. And they are finding that these impacts are causing depression to onset the athletes later on in their lives. And it's why you see, and it explains why you see certain behavioral problems in athletes. You get these scandals coming out on a fairly regular basis, and that's why. Right, these people they're damaging themselves, and their diets. For a lot of athletes, not only is the activity itself damaging their brains, but their diets as well focus more on being able to perform in the game rather than to give their bodies the best chance for longevity, right? Because then by the time they hit 30 odd years old or whatever, they have to retire because they're wrecked, right? Yeah, these sports, they're not. People claim to love and be a fan of their sports idols. It's like, if you actually had any love for these people, you would be like, hang on, but what are they doing themselves what are they actually doing to themselves in order to entertain me? Because let me tell you, once the brain goes and the body goes and all these kinds of things, all the money in the world, it doesn't make you happy. Right? I mean, they're filthy, stinking rich, but their lives are in ruins. So, yeah, that's just some, the study of the brain, man. It's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So Here's another interesting thing. So that's the sort of the neurobiological, neuroscience, sort of what's going on in terms of extroversion and sort of negative emotions versus positive emotions and things like that sort. Conclusion. Talk about what you feel, man. Articulate it, explain it, try to put it in words. It helps. Keeping a journal does the same thing, right? Which gender typically keeps journals? Women do. Hey, do that. If you're struggling with emotional problems, there's something in your head that's just bugging you, go write. No one has to see it. Go write about it. Go write about it, man. And see if you can put it down to words. And you will have a spike in negative emotions by doing that, right? The process, because that's what they found is when you go through this process, you will have a spike in negative emotionality, right? Because now you're dealing with this, you're facing this, it's becoming real, right? And so, again, let's take a woman as an example. She's talking about a particular experience. She starts crying, right? Pull out the tissues. Oh dear, the world's falling apart. But she keeps going, talks about it. Eventually she feels better. Oh, I'm so glad I talked about it. And it's like, now she's better. It's like she didn't even cry, and and that's what it is, because once it's integrated, you then feel better, and you can carry on with things. So really, really fascinating, man. Absolutely fascinating. So men, learn from women how to deal with negative emotions and things like that, because it's one of the reasons why men are so easily angered and can become volatile, because we don't deal with these things, and until now we haven't really known the value, and we haven't really known what it is. And even women didn't know really what they were up to. They thought they were just being a woman, but there's more to it. And the only reason, and so they're more practiced, and because they're generally high in eroticism. So fascinating. So that's extraversion for you, right? And so now you're going to go into the workplace. You're very, very high in extraversion. You're going to go into the workplace. What kind of job should you get? Well, a job where you get to deal with lots of people all the time, and you can be social and things of that sort, right? Is what you want. So one of the first things that comes to people's minds is salesperson. But now here's the weird thing, right? There's a study that it says, let me read the abstract, right? Despite the widespread assumption that extroverts are the most productive salespeople, research has shown weak and conflicting relationships between extroversion and sales performance. Right. Now here's the interesting thing. In light of these puzzling results, I propose that the relationship between extroversion and sales performance is not linear, but curvilinear. Ambiverts achieve greater sales productivity than extroverts or introverts. So an ambivert is someone who's got the balance between the two, right? Because they naturally engage in a flexible pattern of talking and listening. Ambiverts are likely to express sufficient assertiveness and enthusiasm to persuade and close a sale, but are more inclined to listen to the customer's interests and less vulnerable to appearing too excited or overconfident. Right? So that's really, really fascinating, right? Because you think, hey, extroverts. So if you're like major extrovert, sales might not actually be a good idea for you unless you can rein in that assertiveness. And because here's the interesting thing that you actually find, if you go to like a market in a third world country, right, you almost don't even, and anyone who's ever lived in a third world country sort of will know this, where you almost don't even want to show interest in the product, because as soon as that little salesperson behind the counter sees that you've so much as glanced in direction, man, they're on the hoof, and you'll be like, no, and they're gonna haggle you all the way down the road, and they're gonna basically, you're gonna buy their product whether you like it or not. But then what does that do? It means that the next day you just avoid them completely, right? And you never buy from them, because it's like, oh man, just leave me alone, dude. All right. and you have that experience, man, with a third world countries. It's and because they're the ones that will go into the sales, and they're on the hoof. We're gonna sell here. We're gonna make the deal. We're gonna, and for those of us who, no is no, you can get a little bit irritated. And so in the business world, you've got to, you can't just go and just bulldoze people. You've got to, that's why they say they're ambivert, because you can rein that in, and you can be enough, so you can be assertive enough that to let the other person, I have confidence in my product, right? So an introvert is not assertive, and person will look at you as like, well, do you really believe in your product? Are you sure? Yeah, kind of, it's like, okay, no, go away, right? So you can exert that assertiveness that my product's good, my product's the best, you need to have my product, it's going to change your life, it's the future. And but they're not so much where you shove it down their throat and basically sort of leave a bit of a foul taste in their mouth. It's like, dude, give us a break, give us a time to think about it and meditate on it and things of that sort. So yeah, that's what you want to do. Be careful with sales, right? If you don't have that self-control, you might want to avoid sales, because you will end up irritating. You might actually end up irritating your customers more than anything else. But in general, I mean, it's good, because if you're high in enthusiasm, so if you're an extrovert and you're higher in enthusiasm than assertiveness, then rather than bully people, that might actually be then a consideration, because, and this is why, one of those interesting things, more often than not, who do you find in customer service? Women. Why? Well, because they're enthusiastic. Can you help me? Yeah, for sure. We'll get your problem sorted out. And off we go. Glad to help and have a nice chat with them. And just try it, man. If you see that there's a woman on the sales team, right? Be nice to her, and you'll inherit the earth, man. Seriously. Or in customer service or whatever. Be nice to them, and you will inherit the earth. They will do anything for you, right? So you want the best customer service? Get women in there. High agreeableness, high enthusiasm, man. They will give you. They will make your customers beam, right? You don't want a disagreeable son of a gun in there that's going to tell the customer to get lost because they're stupid, which can happen, right? They'll do that. So yeah, this is actually very, very interesting. So for sales, but other than that, man, if you high extroversion, I mean, you want to go into, be a musician, an actor, those are tough, man. Those are saturated, so you might not want to go there. But events coordinator, and especially if you're assertive, and you can organize and get things done, and lead it. You can lead a team. Events coordinators and organizing conferences and things of that sort. But you want to be organized if you want to do that as well. So high in orderliness, of conscientious trait. But that's your sort of thing where you're dealing with people. Events, wedding planner, things of that sort. Where there's a social aspect of it. You don't really want to work in an office, because you're going to be one of those annoying people that walk around bothering everyone else while they're trying to work. It's like, shut up, go sit at your cubicle and do your thing, right? Leave me alone. Yeah, we know those people. I'm one of those people, man. If you get me going, struggle to shut me up, as I'm sure you've noticed. Now speaking about that, here's an interesting one as well. Let's have this quiz here. Where is it? I'm looking for the stupid thing. Right. Now here's the thing, right? So I mentioned if you're assertive, you can lead a team of people and stuff like that. Now, those of you who are in charge of hiring and firing, listen up. You've got a team and you want to choose a team leader. first assess what kind of a team you've got. Right? Because here's the thing. This is what they found in this study by the Academy of Management. They found that people who are high in extraversion, right, do not do well leading a team of people who are proactive. Okay? So, this is very, very interesting, right? So if you have a team of very proactive workers, you are better off putting an introvert in charge. An introvert in charge. Right, because why? Because these people are proactive. They don't actually need leadership. They just need a figurehead who's just going to let them get on with it, right? And that's exactly what an introvert is going to do, right? So you have a competent team of people who are, industrious and proactive, and they're self-motivated and so on and so forth. Put an introvert leading them, because the introvert will basically say, right, guys, you go do your thing. I'll just get the hell out of the way, and I'll do the managerial necessities or the leadership necessities, which is like, be organized and maybe delegate a little bit, or what, fill in those sort of gaps kind of things, and keep the team in sort of a coherent, sort of cohesive state, right? But generally speaking, let them get on with it. They're proactive, they're competent, go for it. You want an extrovert when you have a team of not so proactive people, right? People who need a push, people who need that motivation and a bit of a kick in the pants to get going, and need to be told what to do, right? So so an introvert is good with that, but with a proactive group, they'll just interfere all the time, right? Do what I say, do what I do. They imposes themselves and their will, right? Which is why there's a bit of a narcissistic a risk there with high extroversion. So it's very, very interesting, man. So let me read the abstract here. Very, very interesting. It's like, extraversion predicts leadership emergence and effectiveness, but do groups perform more effectively under extroverted leadership is the question. Drawing on dominance complementarity theory, we propose that although extroverted leadership enhances group performance when employees are passive, this effect reverses when employees are proactive, because extroverted leaders are less receptive to proactivity. Man, I found this. I have definitely found this in my work, man. If the person is an extrovert, they just get in the way, man. They don't. It's like, you're competent, and like for myself, I'm high in industriousness, and I'm enthusiastic, so I don't need to be told. I can see that there's work to be done, and I'll just crack on. And an extroverted and assertive leader is constantly getting in the way all the time. It's like, dude, just leave me alone and to get on with it. Not good at all. So those of you who are setting up business and stuff like that, that's something you definitely want to keep in mind. It's really, really interesting. There's a fascinating thing here, just to have a quick look on this. Here is what they call how can I say, where is it? Let me just find it here. Got a whole bunch of tabs open, this sort of thing. Now, it's something they call fear extinction, right? Fear extinction, and this goes back to earlier on where I was talking about, forgive me, I'm very, very high in openness and low in orderliness, so I jump around all over the place. So, people who will typically like my videos will be people who are high in openness. And there's not much we can do about that. I do my best, I'm sorry, to try be as linear as possible. But so fear, there's something that's known as fear extinction. So what does this mean? You're afraid of something for whatever the case might be, right? And here's a study and there's actually a few of them, that says people differ in their personality traits and in their ability to modulate fear. Does our personality determine how well we extinguish conditioned fear responses? So somewhere along the line in your life, you might have learned to be afraid of carrots because once you choked on a carrot, for example, right? And so someone who has a very, very low ability to modulate fear, let's say that situation, they nearly choked to death, and it instills a fear in you for carrots because stupid things can kill you, right? They might be good for rabbits, but not for you, right? And so you avoid them because you look at carrots, it's stick of death, right? To make an absurd example, of course. So if you're high in extraversion, so fear extinction is what is required for that fear to die off, for you to get over that fear, for example. And if you are higher in extraversion, you are much more likely to get over that fear. So to overcome conditioned fear responses, whatever the fear might be, however it was conditioned and all of that sort of thing, you're much more likely to be able to get over that particular fear, right? And more likely to and less likely to have the fear sort of reinstate itself. Very, very interesting. So just to read here, the abstract. Does our personality determine how well we extinguish conditioned fear responses, or is the opposite true? Herein, we examine the relationship between personality traits, memory for fear extinction, and cortical thickness as a measure of brain structure. So we see these things are it's all coming through, right? The thickness of how much brain matter you've got and so on and so forth, your extraversion. We found that in healthy humans, extinction, retention, and thickness of medial orbital frontal cortex are positively correlated with extraversion. So by extinction, retention means that once the fear is extinct, you retain that extinction, so it stays dead, right? So interestingly enough, there is what they're actually talking about. There is a lot of correlation, not only in your amygdala, where you've got the extraversion and all that sort of thing, but extraversion is also your what they call the orbital. Let me get the word right. Orbital frontal cortex. So it's sort of frontal cortex sort of runs along the face, this part of the brain here, right? So just behind the eyes on the two sides. Path analysis indicates that extinction retention mediates the relationship between the medial orbital frontal cortex thickness and extraversion, thereby illustrating one path through which brain structure influences personality. Very, very interesting. So again, it goes back to something I said in my earlier videos. One of the reasons why personality trait theory is so powerful is because, first of all, it dispels a lot of myths and a lot of ideas that everything in you is just nurture, right? There's that argument, nature versus nurture. It dispels that idea, any hope for any idea that everything about you is merely nurture, right? There's definitely your personality traits. These are biological things. You are the way you are because that's literally how you are made up, right? The structure of your brain, the hormones going through you, all these kinds of things, and not only nurture. Now, the nurture helps you, right? If your nurture is not pathological or whatever the case might be, so you've got decent parents, you're having a decent education, you've got discipline, what it does is it takes you as a person, your personality traits, and allows you to be able to maximize, to fully capitalize on your strengths, and have the discipline and strength of character to moderate your weaknesses and help you achieve the balance, right? So it goes back to, when Christians say, how you discipline your kids, man, better get in there. So, and we see this modern exodus of not only now the father but the mother out of the home, and children are raised by other people, and we're wondering why our children are becoming so insane. Well, there's why. We're not and why so many kids, especially boys, right, are failing left, right, and center in the world. They're dropping out. So, for example, 75% of homeless people are men. 75% of homeless people are men. So much for patriarchy favoring men, huh? Because and a lot of these men, you'll find, they are not given the resources to manage some of the tendencies, and it runs wild with them and ruins them. It's tough. It's not tough, right? It's tough. And it's interesting because not 1 day ago I met a man who used to be homeless, and looking at him and having the discussion with him, the positive attitude and all of these kinds of things in him, I could see why he managed to get himself out of that situation. And he spoke about it. He's like, I got out of it because I maintained a positive attitude. I worked hard. Nothing was beneath me. And I eventually caught a break because I was diligent. And he managed to pull himself out of homelessness. And, and that's why he managed. And a lot of people, if they fall into homelessness or these dire straits and things like that and can't pull themselves up, it's a lot of it is down to personality. It's do you have those internal resources to help you get out of that situation? Or maybe are you there because of the way you are? If you're really disagreeable, so low agreeableness, low conscientiousness, high neuroticism, very, very good predictor of whether you're going to end up either on the street or criminal. Very, very good predictors. It's unbelievable, man, unbelievable. So there's a lot more to the sufferings of mankind than most of this garbage that is talked about on by activists and politicians. It's much more subtle than that, and they all they do is think, oh, it's power or money. They have two explanations for absolutely everything under the sun: is power or money. It's absolutely ridiculous. That shows the savage shallowness of people's thinking when people have one explanation for every phenomena under the sun. That they're not actually thinking about anything in any kind of profound way whatsoever. It's absurd and obscene what they're trying to do, because they actually get in the way of understanding, and actually helping people overcome things. So yeah, ladies and gentlemen, I do think that I might be done. Again, I'm going to put everything up. I mean, I could keep going. This stuff is just so fascinating, but there's some interesting things about. Oh, one last thing, just added bonus for those of you who want. You can switch off now if you want, if you're sick and tired of listening to me speak. Another article talks about Facebook profiles reflect actual personality and not self-idealization. Very interesting. One of the theories has been, on Facebook we pretend to be someone else, we pretend to be better than we are, and the research actually shows that our Facebook profiles and our social media profiles actually reflect who we are a lot more than we think. Right? It reflects actual personality and not self-idealization. And it actually makes a lot of sense, because one thing that people have found, right, like, for example, you get what people call trolls, right, that go out and really irritate people and go after people. And people are like, oh, you wouldn't be that in real life. Well, yeah, they probably wouldn't be that in real life. Why? Because in real life, you can give them a clout over the back of the head, right? They run the risk of physical violence if they irritate you too much. But the fact that they're not like that in real life does not mean that that's not what they're actually like. The only difference is they're smart enough to not be that way in real life, because they're going to catch a fat smack, right? And they know it's the social approval isn't there. So once they have the safety net to be whatever they want to be without any consequences whatsoever, then who they truly are comes out, right? It's like why, for example, getting drunk, if someone gets drunk, or whatever the case might be, sort of their true natures tend to come out, because all the inhibitions are lifted, all the barriers are lifted, that self-control is lifted, so that raw personality can just pour out of you. Very, very interesting considerations, you know. And the internet has a similar kind of thing, right? It removes the inhibitions quite a bit, because you're a lot more responsive to social conventions and the restraints of social conventions when you are actually around other people, and you can witness disapproving glares, threat of violence, whatever the case might be, you know, booing, you know, and those social cues have a mitigating effect on the individual's personality, because, well, you know, I don't want to get booed, or whatever the case might be, right? But on social media, those things are removed, and so I can be and do whatever I want, and there's zero consequence, you know. And because social media puts you in touch, well, basically with an unlimited number of people in a way that has never existed before, you will always find enough. You do not pay for bad behavior, because even if you lose those who dislike your bad behavior, you will gain people who appreciate bad behavior. You know what I mean? So there's absolutely no mitigating factor there whatsoever in social media, and people can just go out and express, and what they say, you know, find like-minded people, so that, you know, and then you start getting biases and people. It's fascinating. So yeah, that's just one of those things. And extroverted people are a lot more likely to use social media more often. And you can go and see, you know, these girls who are, you know, duck facing, you know, that kind of thing, right? They'll be extroverts. You know, those guys who are, you know, by the car, you know, the main manne, as they would say, as they would say in South Africa, you know, the bruise. I miss South Africa. I do. And the South Africans, see how all the brews, you know, there, and all the posers with their wife beater shirts. Those are the extroverts. The people that are, yeah, it's and you can see, like, for example, if you look at my Facebook profile, I just put up articles and quotations and intellectual stuff, and, you know, anyone that knows anything about personality traits will be straight away, this guy's high in extroversion, because he uses social media regularly to put his ideas out there and whatever, and he's also high in openness, because what he puts out is all you know, philosophical or theological. It's all intellectual stuff, and that's it. So it actually reflects really, really who you are. You know, people who post nothing but cat videos, right? You go cat video after cat video, and punctuated by a bunny video and their dog falling over a ball and farting video, whatever the case might be. You know, this person is agreeable and probably low in openness, because there's nothing intellectual about it. It's just agreeableness taking over, and off it goes, you know. And then extroversion, enthusiasm. Brilliant. You can. So yeah, you guys will never look at Facebook profiles in the same way again, I guarantee it. So yeah, ladies and gentlemen, that is it. Thank you very much for your viewership. Please subscribe, please share, you know, I'm extrovert. I want the world to know who I am. Not because this is beneficial. I promise. I'm not being narcissistic here. But then a narcissist would say that, wouldn't it? Damned if you say it and damned if you don't. But anyway, right, go ahead. Thank you. Cheerio. Goodbye.